Hello everyone, KROW here. It's been 5 months since the last role theory video, and I think it's finally time to get back into some theory discussion. But before we get started, let's revisit the most controversial section of the video, main supports versus flex supports. Firstly, the main and flex support categories are not identical to the main healer classification that's based on raw healing output. There's nothing wrong with identifying when you need a hero with large healing output, but this isn't particularly useful in terms of creating effective team compositions, as well as highlighting the support's primary value. I'm not sure why there's this idea floating around suggesting that the main and flex support categories are outdated, to be quite honest, and in fact I actually find it even more useful now in Overwatch 2 in that it's actually the term healer that's outdated. But before we get into why this is the case, let's revise the definition previously proposed. Originally I had stated that the classification is based on the healing mechanic's reliance on aim, which I stand corrected. And to give you a better classification, the difference between main and flex support is the overall carry/pick potential, which in turn often comes with reliance on aim. The main supports Lucio, Mercy, Brig, and Lifeweaver has lower pick potential and a higher reliance on the team in order to generate value, whereas flex supports Zen, Kiriko, Moira, Baptiste, Ana, and the latest edition Illari are distinct in their individual carry/pick potential. So why is the main and flex support classification more useful in Overwatch 2? Though we can't say that healing output doesn't matter, with the lack of a second tank in 5v5, healbotting just doesn't work anymore and results in the tank getting all of the aggro from the enemy team, preventing them from creating space in the front line. Then it's a downward spiral from there. The DPS complain that the tank isn't making space, then the tank complains that he can't survive and the team doesn't have enough heals, then the supports tell the tank to look at the healing numbers and yells at the DPS to go get picks. It's a classic Overwatch 2 team implosion. In other words, in Overwatch 2 you need at least one support to put active pressure onto the enemy team. It's not the healer, it's the flex support who has to put in the impact that alleviates their teammates from taking all the aggro. Whether you get a pick on an enemy or force them to break line of sight, you're actually the one creating an opportunity for your tank and flex DPS to get their job done without being instantly vaporized. Okay, that's enough with the rant, let's get back to the main topic. What is the rock paper scissors meta theory and why is it important? To answer this question, let's take a look back on what we covered in role theory. Previously we covered that each role can be split into main and flex roles and a team composition based on one tank, one main DPS, one flex DPS. Either one main and one flex support or two flex supports will in general see more success in competitive play compared to a random mix of heroes. But this is only half of the full equation. In practice, building viable team comps can be more complicated than simply filling in each of the 5 positions with an assortment of heroes. In order to truly maximize a team, a set of heroes with similar strengths and playstyles need to be selected. So understanding the rock paper scissors nature of heroes becomes the second defining factor of determining the effectiveness of a team composition. Previously, we inspected the effectiveness of a composition based on individual hero roles, but this time we'll be going one step further and focus on the synergy between all 5 heroes of a composition. In a way, the previous video was only half of the equation and was just laying down the stones for today's topic. Only when the conditions discussed today are satisfied can we truly assess the viability of a composition. This way, you can at least be right when you flame your teammates in range. So let's get right to it. Rock, paper, scissors, and Overwatch. First, in order to understand the concept, we need to think about why the concept even makes any sense. Let me give you 3 examples. Let's say the enemy is playing Widowmaker, a sniper hero, and you're just an innocent little Mei with a garden hose. Then, how should we go about taking this matchup? If you choose to jump out into the open, hoping to spray the Widow with your garden hose, of course, you're just going to get tapped in the head. From a large distance, Widowmaker generally has the advantage, but does that mean that Mei doesn't even have a chance at beating Widowmaker? Of course not. You have the advantage in a close range fight, so by using your cooldowns to close the distance and run at her face, you could easily turn the tables in the duel. In other words, you have to utilize a playstyle that runs at people in order to fight at close range. But what if you're a Mei dueling a Tracer instead? Tracer's pistols barely deal any damage at long distances, so as Mei, there's really no need for you to go out of your way to close that gap. In fact, in this matchup, it's really the Tracer that has to get close, while you as the Mei just need to pressure her out as a response to her closing in. Now, let's say you're a Widowmaker and the enemy is a Tracer. If you were to take the fight from a distance in an open map, the matchup can be pretty winnable. But if the Tracer has any kind of cover to play around, well, tough luck. In fact, this is even more difficult to play against compared to the previous example with a Mei closing the distance, since Mei doesn't have any movement abilities to easily get close. So with our examples, Widow, Mei, and Tracer, each representing rock, paper, and scissors, they also represent the 3 main playstyles in Overwatch. And at the core of today's topic is how the different playstyles fit into the 10 available hero slots in a match. It's especially important to note that we're now considering all 10 players in the game. If you're playing Mei and you're up against 5 characters with the same strengths as Widowmaker, it won't make much of a difference whether you rush directly into the enemy like in the previous 1v1 situation. In fact, chances are you'll just get skewered from all directions. But if you had your trusty tank and support friends to go in with you, you'd be able to take down the enemies one by one with the power of friendship. The point is, in order to enable and maximize a hero's standardized playstyle, the other 4 members of your team should also have a playstyle that synergizes with you. Especially in Overwatch, heroes have a various set of skills, and some of which are designed to be highly dependent on your allies. Well, this seems kind of a false advertisement. But the bottom line is that it's always better to play characters that have synergistic playstyles. The main types of compositions can be split into 3, namely poke, rush, and dive. We could actually split these down even further, but at the broadest level, these are the 3 main composition archetypes. For the past 7 years, Overwatch has had numerous hero additions, but despite that, the basic compositional framework has not changed. The primitive versions of rush being deathball, brawl, slambulance, goats, etc., examples of poke being bunker and double shield, and of course dive just always being dive. First up is poke. This composition is characterized by ranged heroes and thus preferring to pick off enemies from a distance, Widowmaker being a great example. Next is rush. Rush compositions work best in close range, but it requires the team to engage first as a single unit. For the rush comp, Mei would be a prime example. Last but not least is dive. Similar to rush, dive also works best at close quarters, but we can see the difference when we expand the context to all 10 players in the game. Rush requires all 5 players of a team's supports included to move as a single unit and focuses down a single target, increasing the overall survivability of the team. Dive similarly focuses down a single target but has 2 distinct differences. First is that the number of players that engage to focus down a target can vary, which makes the composition more versatile in fights, allowing the supports to play further back when healing. Secondly, the setup for the engagement requires the players to be spread out rather than together as a single unit. Unlike rush, setting up the engagement from only one angle actually decreases your team's survivability. Now that we have a good basis on how each of these 3 compositions function, how do the 3 different playstyles fare against each other? At least on paper, poke beats rush, rush beats dive, and dive beats poke. But in practice, this can vary depending on the map, strategy, as well as the individual playstyles of each player, making each game different even with the same composition. In general, in a ranked match, you don't always get a perfectly unified composition, and the team fights are not always guaranteed to be a 5v5 scenario. Sometimes it'll be a 4v5 or even a 1v3, etc, etc. A quick example would be that a Widowmaker restricts the Ana's playstyle to only heal from cover, but if the Widowmaker dies first setting up a 5v4, Ana could play more aggressively and prioritize poking down the enemies. So it's not as simple as memorizing an equation to jump to a conclusion about which composition or playstyle would win. Rather than being strictly limited to the 3 styles, you have to dynamically change your playstyles within each of the composition archetypes. It's a must to take multiple variables into account when playing. Now to the meat of today's video. What playstyles are available to each hero and what compositions do they fit in? Let's talk about how each of the 38 heroes can adapt depending on the situation and what the most efficient way to utilize the hero is. Of course, a few of the heroes are pretty straightforward. I mean, you wouldn't ever engage into the enemy as a Widowmaker like a Mei or Tracer would, since there isn't currently any other sniper in the game stronger than Widow. There's never a reason for you to go in first, which makes Widowmaker's only available playstyle poke. If we build a chart to identify each hero's playstyle compatibility, this is what it would look like. The green checkmark indicates the default playstyle of the hero and reflects the importance of the hero in the corresponding composition. It's both the recommended and best playstyle of that hero. Incompatible marks when a hero is impossible or difficult to utilize in the said composition. Think of it as a Tracer trying to poke from long range or a Widowmaker grappling into the enemies to engage. In other words, the X mark refers to poor synergy within the composition and can potentially be a troll pick against a mirrored playstyle. For example, if both teams are playing poke, Symmetra would be a highly incompatible hero for the matchup. But this only refers to the character's lack of synergy and doesn't necessarily mean that the hero would be entirely useless. A Sim 1 trick would have some kind of strategy in mind to overcome these limitations. However, in most cases, if ally and enemy compositions, map, and situation are all pointing in the direction of that big fat X, it'll 100% be difficult to find value, and that's a straight fact. Anyway, the compatible and incompatible markers were assigned by assessing each hero's fundamental capabilities and the overall kit. It's unlikely to change much in the near future. The markers that can be more volatile are the orange triangles. Playable. The playstyle is a bit of an awkward fit and there's not much synergy with that composition, but it's theoretically possible. For example, Lucio is highly rush oriented, but that doesn't mean that he can't be used to dive. There's a possibility that these heroes can be used in that composition, but it can heavily depend on the map, patch, or meta. For heroes like Ana or Sojourn who have highly flexible skill sets, they can be utilized in pretty much any kind of composition, or heroes like Junkrat or Bastion don't necessarily. On the other hand, red triangles signify the character's ability to counter the said composition. Heroes like Doom, Tracer, or Sombra can be useful counter picks if both sides are playing poke by diving alone and marking the enemy sniper. Fire and Echo's triangle in Rush, Torbjorn, Junkrat, Junker Queen, and Ramatra's triangle for dive is also a similar case to the previously stated examples. Additionally, there are two things to take note of from the chart. One is highly flexible heroes like Sojourn, Ana, Ramatra, or Orisa, who can be highly versatile. The other is the similarity between Rush and Dive. Heroes that are good in Dive can often be used to a lesser degree in Rush. In contrast, poke heroes don't seem to have much strength and versatility, but if you think about their specific use case, maps good for poke compositions make these heroes devastating to play against. But of course, if you were to play against a team like the London Spitfire, that's an entirely different story, so good luck with that. But make sure to view the graph with a pinch of salt, and it's by no means absolute. This is just a visual representation of what you can feel out over time while accruing more experience playing the game, and it doesn't take into account any specific meta or map. And in order to utilize this information, you need to be able to adapt your playstyle mid-game depending on the situation. Furthermore, heroes previously classified in the defense role early on in Overwatch 1 also have the tendency to be more effective in a defending scenario, and it's a bit difficult to reflect that visually in a single graphic. Now, let's summarize. Taking one step further beyond the main/flex role theory, we've encapsulated the essence of the rock, paper, scissors playstyles and compositions in Overwatch. Let's take a look at a real example. The blue team has a Mercy one-trick which lacks synergy with the ball and Tracer. The red team counters with Winston, Sombra, Reaper to constantly harass the backline, and the red team's backline runs an Ana break, nullifying the 2v2 dives coming in from the blue team. Because both teams retain the compositions throughout the match, the GM1 Mercy isn't really able to do anything about the enemies, leading to a full hold on point A and ultimately a loss. Anyways, this was KROW, and I'll be seeing you next time.